Can you talk about the lost books of the Bible? Lost in quotes. Yeah, that's true. They were never lost, and certainly not hidden. If we were supposed to hide them, we did a terrible job because you can go rent them from the library. So, no, they just simply weren't scripture. That's the point. That's why they were never included to begin with. But I'll give you the top 10, and I'll tell you when they were written and why they're not scripture. So the first one, and probably the most famous, is the Gospel of Thomas. And it was written sometime between 110 and 140 AD. Now, we know it's a forgery because it does contain a fully developed Gnostic theology, and Gnosticism was not developed until after all the Gospels had been written. John was actually battling the early stages of Gnosticism in his first letter. And that's why he says that any spirit that says that Jesus did not come in the flesh is not of God. Because Gnostic teachings is that everything that's physical is evil and everything that is spiritual is good, and so they claim that Jesus didn't actually come in the flesh. The next one is the Gospel of Peter, written in the 2nd century, and we know that one is a forgery because it has kind of legendary material like a talking cross. So it's closer to fan fiction than a 1st century eyewitness. Next, you have the Gospel of Judas, written sometime between 130 and 170 AD, and this one we know is a forgery because it relies on a more developed Sethian Gnostic cosmology. I know that's a big word, but that only emerged long after Judas died, and he certainly would not have had time to write it in between his rejection of Christ and hanging himself. Fourth on the list is the Infancy Gospel of James, or called the Proto-Evangelium of James, written about 150 AD. Now, this one is clearly a forgery because it has elaborate childhood stories of Mary that contradict earlier sources. It reflects more 2nd century theological interests. Number 5 is the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, written in the 2nd century. Now, this one's clearly a forgery because it has Jesus using magic as a child, but yet in the Gospel of John, we know that his first miracle was at the wedding of Cana. Number 6 is the Gospel of Mary, also written in the 2nd century. And so this would supposedly have been written by Mary Magdalene. And again, it has very developed ideas about Gnosticism and metaphysics that weren't even ideas when Mary Magdalene was around. Number 7 is Acts of Paul and Thecla, written sometime between 160 and 180 AD. And this one is kind of a romantic adventure and has a lot of exaggerated ideals that contradict with Paul's letters that we know from the early church fathers that he actually wrote. Number 8 is the Apocalypse of Peter, also written in the 2nd century. Now, the forgery here is very, very obvious because it has a highly systematized description of heaven and hell, which reflect later Christian imagination rather than what Peter would have taught. Number 9 is 1st Enoch, which is just commonly referred to as the Book of Enoch, written sometime between 300 and 100 BC, yes, before Christ. What really obviously makes this not scripture is the fact that it claims to have been written by Enoch, but given the geographical names and events that are mentioned, we can prove that it was written in between the Old and New Testament. So there's no way Enoch himself could have written it. And so you might ask, what about Jesus and Jude quoting Enoch? Yes, they quote Enoch's prophecies, not the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch also quoted Enoch's prophecies. All you have is a book and 2 guys all quoting an actual person. That doesn't make it scripture. And then number 10 is called the Ascension of Isaiah, and that was written sometime around Jesus' time, between 100 BC and 200 AD. This one blends Jewish apocalyptic ideas with a Christian version of Christ's heavenly ascent. This is not something that Isaiah would have had a clear picture of. So if anyone brings those books to you and says, hey, read this, this is scripture, just shake your head no and walk away.